The Pit Press Podcast.
Reinholz launches from downtown. No. Van Horn, no. And that's it. New Mexico wins it.
Some big-time games and shots. How about this? Where have you been? MC him. Knocking him down twice. Looking top and keeping it alive. House from deep. Got it. This kid is amazing. This is what got them in trouble. That ball screen giving up the mid-range. Look at this foul. House again. It's topping. Fifth assist.
And New Mexico's going to dribble out the clock. The Lobos three-peat as conference tournament champions Kendall Williams fires the ball into the air. But New Mexico wins it this afternoon 64-58 over San Diego State. And the Lobos claim the Mountain West Conference's automatic bid into the NCAA tournament.
Welcome to another episode of the Pit Press Podcast. Now we are turning the tide to trying to interview a former player every Friday for the rest of the duration through the national championship game. I know, Ed, we had kind of talked about that, but I think we're actually doing it now. Before I introduce my co-host and get to today's guest, we want to thank those people that make this show possible. Hey, if you're looking for a place to watch the Lobos when they are on the road, head over to Turquoise Desert Tap Room. It's only a few minutes away from Santa Ana Star Casino. Catch the Lobos, other college basketball games, NBA, NHL action. You can test your luck going there for Super Bowl Sunday. Stop by for food, drinks, and all sports action. Turquoise Desert Tap Room also serves local brews on tap. Find them on Facebook and Instagram at Turquoise Desert Tap Room. Abrazo Homes, they are Lobo owned and Lobo operated and a proud supporter of the University of New Mexico Athletic Department and its student athletes. Join the movement and help Abrazo Homes build momentum by contributing to the 505 Sports Venture Foundation. Our friends over there, Kurt Roth and Drew Herrig, or the UNM Lobo Club. When you buy an Abrazo home, and I always say it, Ed, not bad for a Pollock honky, become a part of the Abrazo. I butchered it. Never mind. Become a part of the Abrazo Familia. Looking to build the perfect home in New Mexico? Find them at abrazohomes.com. I butchered it there, Ed. I'm sorry. As I always tell you, my grandmother in New Jersey who asked me to speak something nice to her in Spanish, and I said no habla español. She went to 7 a.m. mass in Polish. Anyway, I always think about that when I speak Spanish now. Hey, he's the voice of the Western New Mexico Mustangs, and he's been a Lobo fan since 1970. Ed, I'm happy to join you today. How are you, Ed Nunez?
Yeah, I'm doing well, Ryan. Western New Mexico, we dropped two, and I was telling Mike Winters about this conference. UT Permian beat us 107-79 in the men's last night. Heartbreaker with the women. It was tied, a scramble at the end of the game. Offensive rebound at the buzzer. UT Permian beats Western New Mexico 58-56. So a little bit of a mixed bag there. So day off today, and then Western New Mexico will take on Angelo State in women's at 12, and then the men play at 2:30. So kind of a tough loss for the women. And the men, I'm telling you, it's not that Western New Mexico has bad players on their roster. They don't. That's how good the conference is. It's a very good conference.
I need to get out, and whenever I hear Permian, I think of Friday Night Lights. But anyway, our next guest, at least you don't miss a Lobo game tomorrow.
Yeah, that's right.
We get a nice break in the action. Our next guest played, as I asked him before we hit record, said he was a forward, but he essentially played the 1 through 5 position. He played for UNM from 1983 to 87, and he averaged 5.6 points a game, 4.2 rebounds, almost 3 assists a game. I'm going to round that number up. He's 13 all time with 351 assists in the program. His name is Mike Winters. Mike, we really appreciate you joining us. How are you?
Doing great. It's nice to be here. You guys are doing a great job. Ed shared several of the cast with me, and it's fun to see some familiar faces come onto the show.
Well, we appreciate you joining us. I'll throw it over to Ed. He's got the first question.
Well, Mike, just before I go to the first question, that Phil Smith interview spawned a lot of, Larry Markland and I talked. Petey Gibson called me and weighed in what he thought. It brought Phil. Phil is kind of a close circle guy. You know that, doesn't talk to a lot of people, but it brought him back to Ronnie Beach called me about Phil. So a lot of people were happy to see him, and I think was happy to do it, and I think had maybe changed his mind about maybe coming out and talking more. He's a great guy. We know that. You played with him. A great ball player, one of the best I've ever seen in my life, honestly. And I think you probably agreed. And then you played with Kelvin. We'll get to that later. But Mike, you played at El Dorado in high school, and were state runner-ups in 1982 and state champions in '83. Playing for former Lobo Rich Pekorski, who Rich had his own success with the Lobos. They used to call him the garbage man because he get rebounds. He had those long arms. Rich Pekorski was tough as heck, man. Tell us about your time as a Golden Eagle playing for, and tell us about some of the players you played with at El Dorado.
Oh man, starting out with that '82 team. I mean, we had Carl Willock, who Ed, you'll probably join me in this. I think he's still one of the top 5 that's played in the APS system. Carl went on to go to Texas, but I also played with Greg Wheeler, Artie Nichols, Todd Sturck, Mike Stryker, Ron Parrish. On that team we had Jimmy Ellenberger, Norm's son, and Jimmy was a football player who liked to play basketball. But that group, I really think we had a lot of talent. That was a lot more talented team than my '83 team. But my '83 team, there were 6 of us that went all the way from John Baker Elementary to Hoover Middle School to El Dorado together. And growing up, we just talked about being in that state. The guide would always have the state champions listed in the back. Every year they'd list, for Quad A, Triple A. And our thing was we want to get El Dorado in there. So the 5 or 6 of us that came up through the system together, we were able to do that. It was a close game in the championship, and we squeaked by, and those are still some great memories. And there's nothing like playing in the pit as a high school player.
Tell us about who you beat in the championship again. I remember you texted it to me.
We beat Los Alamos that year in the championship game, and the year before we lost to Farmington. Now they had Dwayne Ward, who went on to pitch in the major leagues, several teams for Major League Baseball, and Sean Walker. Mike Sanders, Coach Sanders' son, was the point guard, and that was kind of a nip and tuck game. We had played Hobbs the day before, and back then you played Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So Hobbs, I think our game was 88-86. It was crazy. It was up and down. They had Tony Benford, Timmy Smith. Timmy still, I think, might own the Super Bowl record for rushing when he was with the Redskins years back.
Remember what I told you prior? I can name Timmy Smith, Super Bowl 22. I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
Yeah. No, Ryan. I mean, he was just unbelievable athlete, and he and Ellenberger kind of got into it. They had played in the state football against each other, and they got into a fight at the end of that game. And then on the basketball court, we're sitting in the second quarter, and the next thing you know, those two are chesting up, and I turn around to Tony Benford, who Ed probably met when he was here coaching. Tony's just a marvelous guy. And, Tony and I were kind of like just holding each other, pretending like we were involved with it. But Jimmy and Timmy were going at it. I mean, they were going to get into it. So some good memories back, guys, been years and years ago, but still love to go in there. And you can remember the missed shots and the made shots from those high school days.
Pork, a heck of a coach too, right?
Pork was unreal. And I mean, not only that, just the conditioning and things that we did. He was fantastic for me. And at 6 foot, I was 6'2" as a sophomore, come into my junior year at 6'6". So I had kind of always grown up playing a guard. My dad was a point guard at UNM back in the early 60s. So, basketball coach as a father, and just learned to handle the ball. And I think Pork knew for me at the next level, I needed to be facing the basket. So, at El Dorado, a lot of times I would be in the 3 spot or the 2 spot just to get kind of familiar with that and have an opportunity to go on and play at the next level. So he was great for us. He was a hard coach. I mean, there were days where I didn't think we were going to get out of that gym. Back in that day, there was no restrictions on times for practice or anything like that. And there were times when if he was upset with us, he wouldn't bring out the basketballs. We'd just run all day. So, you wanted to go out and give it your all in the game, so you didn't have to run the next day at practice.
Yeah, he was one heck of a player too. Your son Mark also won a state championship in 2012, playing for your very good friend Roy Sanchez and beating La Cueva. That was a heck of a game. I covered that with the legendary Henry Zafoya. And I think your daughter, you mentioned, won a cheerleading championship, and your dad was part of a state championship as well. What did that mean to you, seeing your son and your daughter, and knowing your dad won a state championship as well? What did that mean, seeing all those champions there?
Well, I think it's so special, Ed, to be again, born and raised here, and then to have your children go on and attend the same high school. Mark and I'd like to do a little research at some point and just see how many father-sons have won a state title at the same school. I think it's probably a pretty short list. Roy Sanchez and I met at UNM freshman year. He had also played basketball at Los Alamos. He wasn't on the team we lost to, but when we met, that was one of the first things that came up. He goes, "I don't really like you because you beat Los Alamos." We look at this 40 years later, Roy and I are still really close friends. He's done a heck of a job at El Dorado. He was fantastic for Mark and for them to win that. And I just, walking down on the pit floor and grabbing a hold of your son and some of his friends, it was just full circle for me, to be honest. And then 2 years after that, my daughter, again, also in the pit, they win a state championship for cheerleading, all at El Dorado High School. So, very, very proud about that. We all have good memories. We kind of tease their mom because she attended Santa Fe High and she didn't win a state championship. So she's our non-state championship member.
It's a small town. I know your son. And isn't somebody related to Matt McQuaid, who was on the Final Four team in 2019, or am I making that up?
Yeah, Matt is my nephew, my sister's youngest son. And we had a great experience with Matt being at Michigan State. We traveled. I was at 3 of the 4 Big Ten tournaments, and we went to the Final Four in Minneapolis. We went up to Portland and watched Matt. Coach Izzo was fantastic. I mean, he had been out here as an assistant coach and played in the old Lobo Invitational. So when I came in, being 6'8", he was like, "Hey, Uncle, you played, right?" Uncle played. I was like, "Yeah, I was at New Mexico." And so Coach Izzo and I got to visit a little bit. Scott Skiles was on that team. I don't know if you remember that one, Ed. But
I know that.
I do. Oh, yes, I do.
It was a crazy game. And but Matt had a great career at Michigan State, and we just had a fun, just an awesome time going out and experiencing the Big Ten Conference and the NCAA tournaments.
I obviously, I knew your son. Talking to you, the only thing I can say about that Final Four, and I was working for CBS in New York, is I just wish Auburn, for the sake of Charles Barkley, would have beaten Virginia. I know, I'm sorry, I didn't at the time. I didn't have any ties, but that's awesome. I was telling you off the record, I've become such a big college basketball fan, and I think I was actually messaging your son over Instagram with that because I know him. It's a small world because I saw the name and I was like, wait a second. But I'm getting older. I'm getting older and dumber. Ed, then Ed can give me crap for that. Anyway, growing up in back to everything on topic. Growing up in Albuquerque and following the Lobos, who were some of your favorite players back then? Growing up.
Oh, I could go through the team that won. You got Phil Abney, Michael Cooper, Marvin Automatic Johnson, Jimmy Allen, Willie Howard, Russell Saunders. You grew up, if you were playing basketball, you were around basketball in Albuquerque, those guys were just your heroes. They were your legends. And, for me, I was fortunate enough to go on and play at UNM. I got to meet Michael Cooper and work Michael's camps at, he used to run Coop Camp out at West Mesa back in the day. And, to meet Marvin and Phil and to get to know those guys kind of post playing, it's just really unique. Willie Howard, we were playing in the Hoop It Up one year, and I didn't think Willie knew me from anybody. And I walk out and he's like, "Winters, what's going on?" And I'm like, "Hey, Willie, how are you?" And this was right after I finished playing. And I'll tell you what, Willie was right up there with Patrick Ewing, who I played against, as being the strongest human being I've ever had to kind of get in there and mix it up with. But we kind of joked around the whole Hoop It Up game and just had a good time. So, to meet your heroes and have that experience, it's just awesome.
One quick comment about Willie Howard, Mike. Mike, you mentioned that team of 77, 78. And, Willie, he tried to dunk against BYU. He actually jumped from the free throw line, and he just back rimmed it. Yeah. And I remember reffing his games as an adult. and he would just lay people out, right? And I would call fouls on him, and he'd be like, "Man, me and you are going to have to go outside." I said, "Willie, these dudes are in the infirmary, man. You put them in the infirmary. How do you think that's not a foul?" Now, we got to be good friends, but you know how he played. As you mentioned, gosh, that guy, he should have gone pro. He should have been in the pros. But, you know, things happen, and he was drafted in the 4th round by the Utah Jazz. But when you mentioned that name and those other guys, I had to weigh in. Ryan, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. That's totally cool. I stole the thunder with the Michigan State connection. I have to ask this because you're speaking to a New York Knickerbocker fan. What was, you said Patrick Ewing was the strongest man. Was he maybe the best player you played against in college?
Yeah, I mean, by position, I would definitely say that. We had a great game here in the pit, and Ed, if you were at that one, I think my ears.
I was.
It was Ryan. It was so unique. We came down to warm up probably 45 minutes early. We'd always go down and shoot a little bit, and the entire ramp was already lined with just fans. But they were waiting to see Georgetown. You know, they had just won the national championship the year before. They probably had 6 or 7 pro players on that team. I know Reggie Williams. I got to meet Reggie in high school. We roommate together back in New York. We both won our state's award for the Hertz #1 sports performance. So Reggie and I were friends, and you know, during the game against Georgetown, you know, there was a downtime where you could maybe talk, but we were in timeouts where Colson would be talking and we couldn't hear anything. So we had to go to hand signals and writing things down. It was just a constant hum that game. But one of our goals was to have Patrick not dunk. You know, he was just known to just dunk the heck out of the ball. And we laid out about 4 or 5 goals for the game, and we were proud to not let him dunk. Now, TJ Drake tackled him one time, and I thought Patrick was going to kill TJ. You know, I always teased TJ was a foul waiting to happen, but he also was not going to let, you know, Ewing dunk on him. But it was just fun to play that level of talent, and you could tell, you know, Ewing was just so special and unique, and that team was just, man, they were like just clockwork. I mean, they didn't blink at all. You know, we'd get a good run, and I think we ended up losing by probably 8 points or so, but it was just fun to play competition like that. But I had a lot of run-ins with some great players. You know, Sean Elliott at Arizona, Tim Hardaway at UTEP, Gary Payton, who's up Oregon State. We played Gary when he was pretty young, and you know, everybody gets on House, and I think House reminds me of Gary Payton, where he could just lock you up, and he's talking a lot. I mean, I hope we get to that a little bit, you know, later in the show. But I'll tell you, House against Nevada, when he's walking around on that court yelling at his teammates that this is our house. This is our house. I'm standing up in Section G going, man, I'm going to get down on that court. We got to go down and help. So I just love his passion. But yeah, there was a lot of great talent back in the time I played. Fennis Dembo, Eric Lechner at Wyoming. I think Jerry Stroman up at Utah was a guy that was really underrated. Devin Durant at BYU, Timo Saralainen. You know, some of those names were. I always tell people you knew there was another level. You know, that NBA level, because you get out on a court and guys would do things. Elliott, I went up with a right hand to block his shot, the first shot of the game, and I was excited. I was guarding the freshman, so I was all, you know, if you got a freshman, you usually had a pretty easy night because they weren't really in the rotation to be scoring. He switches to left hand on me and swishes it from about 20 feet out. I'm like, what the heck is that? You know, this is just a different level of play. So just a lot of great competition back then.
No, I appreciate that answer. I'm sorry. I still think, and Ed might appreciate this, and I was I was 7 or 8, but I can remember with my grandfather, Game 7, 94 finals, John Starks goes 2 for 18, and Rudy Tomjanovich and Hakeem Olajuwon and all those guys. I was in South River, New Jersey, I remember. And then the Bronco chase had just happened like the night before, something with OJ. But anyway, what led you to choose to play at UNM? Why did you choose UNM to play basketball?
Yeah, I think, you know, I had a lot of great opportunities. I probably would have ended up at Syracuse. That was Coach Boeheim got after me when I was a junior. He was just starting out at Syracuse. He signed Tom Sheehy, and I think that the week of the state tournament for New Mexico, Ryan, I wanted to focus on, you know, that year for El Dorado. So I was pushing a lot of things out. I didn't do early visits. I was going to do everything after the season. And Coach Boeheim called me that week of the state tournament. They had signed Dwayne Pearl Washington. He was the last scholarship. So that's kind of one of those stories where, I had a great opportunity. And that was my number one school. Then I was with, had it down to CSU, Texas, and UNM. And UNM got in at it, honestly, late with me. Coach Colson, probably was December of my senior year. I didn't really receive any kind of communication. Coach Lamphere had come out and watched a game or two, but they didn't stay around and talk to me. So I was, behind the scenes. My girlfriend back in that day will tell you that I was just saying all kinds of things. I'll never be a Lobo. I can't do this or that because, it's all I wanted. Growing up here, going to the games with my dad, playing in the state tournament in the pit. If you're from Albuquerque or New Mexico, you want to be a Lobo. So as things kind of progressed, I visited those other schools. Rich Strong was up at Colorado State, great player at Sandia High School, and my dad and his dad knew each other real well. I went to the visit with Carl, and honestly, Bobby Knight was there for their banquet. And Coach Knight sat down with me for about a half hour, and we just had a one-on-one. And part of his discussion, though, he got into is like, why would you stay there? Well, I mean, I was born and raised here. I love New Mexico. So when he starts doing that, and I knew he also loved to come out and fish. He'd fish with Ellenberger and Coach Haskins. There was all those stories back in the day in the papers. So I was kind of like, why is Bobby Knight ripping on our state? What's going on with that? And then as I get ready to leave, Carl and I were really close friends, and he wasn't sure that Coach Bob Weltlich was the head coach at the time at Texas. He said, hey, Mike, I don't know that he's going to make it another year. There's a lot of pressure on him. And when I came back and went on my campus visit here at UNM, I spent a ton of time with Coach Colson, Coach Chiat. Jim Williams came and spent time with me. Jim was an El Dorado guy, and had worked with Coach Colson as graduate assistant. And, getting back to that Lobo Gate stuff, it was like you could be part of kind of getting things back on track, or, trying to get Lobo basketball back to where it was when I was growing up and going to the pit in the 70s. So it was a great opportunity and a great challenge. The Anderson School of Management, I will say, as far as my degree goes, I've got a bachelor's from there as well as a master's degree when I was coaching for Coach Bliss. So I just had a great opportunity to be here in my home state and hopefully turn things around. And like Phil said, you take a lot of pride. We would host back in the day, you'd host the recruits coming in, and a lot of times they were coming in to take your place. I had Rob Robbins, I had Rob Leffel, I had Luke Longley, so some of the people that you're able to also influence and get to come to UNM, that legacy kind of lives on. So I look down the road at a lot of those guys, Willie Banks, JJ Griego, anybody from New Mexico that I could talk to. I missed out on Joey Harge. Joey was at St. Pius and ended up going to Oregon State. But Joey's the only miss I had on recruits that I hosted, and I could sell them on New Mexico.
You did a great job with those guys. The guys, as you mentioned, that came in after Lobo Gate, and we'll get to Coach Colson here in a minute. But Mike, as a freshman, what are your memories as a freshman? You played in all 35 games. Your impact was immediate. Had 21 points against Utah in February of 1984 in a big WAC win that season. What are your memories playing as a freshman?
Well, I can tell you on that one, your previous guest, Phil Smith, I came in, and as a freshman, we were kind of just between Kelvin, Hunter, and myself, you kind of try to fill the spot. We had some experienced seniors in the starting role. I think TJ was a sophomore at the time, but they were starting TJ because they didn't want to kind of disrupt the six freshmen. But Phil, in that game against Utah, I scored on a couple kind of back doors. He was getting it to me, and they were playing off of me, honestly, and going and trying to double team Tim Garrett. And Phil, to get Phil upset, I'd always call him Philly, because Tim would call him Philly. Philly, get me the ball. Philly, pass me the ball. I'm open, Philly. So,
I remember that. I remember all that.
Phil came over and he goes, if you miss, I'm not going to pass it to you again. And, Ed, you mentioned earlier, as far as a great point guard, I got to play with several of the greatest ones in UNM history with him, Kelvin, Scarborough, Darryl McGee. But Phil was just unique. And I mean, he didn't let go. I think I ended up 5 for 5 from the field and 11 for 12 at the free throw. When I missed that free throw, he came over, there was probably 20 or 30 seconds left in the game. He's like, all right, you're not getting the ball again because you missed. So that kind of is a memory. I was on back in the day. They used to have Sports Center, and I mean, Ryan with there was always highlights. But we went out and played San Diego State. They had Michael Cage on that team, Leonard Allen, who was 6'10", just could fly through the air. And I came in and was guarding Cage, and I remember one play they ran, I turned around and Allen catches an alley-oop and just slams it, and I, whatever reason, had my hands. I catch the ball coming through. It was the Sports Center highlight for about 2 weeks. So that's my
That's
claim
awesome.
It's one of those claim to fames where you're not really in the right place to be the one getting all the accolades. But just a great, we were 24-10 that year. We fought. We started out kind of rough. We got into conference play and had a really good run. Back then they took, I think those first 2 years, Ed, when I was at UNM, it was 54-team tournament for the NCAA. At the end of the season, we beat BYU in the semifinal, and we lose to UTEP, pretty close game in the final. And the NCAA takes BYU and UTEP to the tournament. So it's kind of bittersweet at the end of that run. We really thought we deserved a shot at it, but I think we were still kind of having some repercussions from what had gone on. But just a great jump into big time basketball. George Scott, who too, Ed, George got hurt that year. So I think if we had George, Michael Johnson was still there, but Michael got into kind of a little sideways with Coach Colson. We lost 2 or 3 guys that year. And that's where I was telling Ryan earlier, a lot of times, Hunter, myself, we'd be in different roles. We'd be in a 2-guard one day, and then the next day we're playing somebody, and they wanted us to play the 4 spot. So a lot of moving parts back then. Phil touched on it. I don't think we had a shot clock that year. So some games we'd come out and sit on the ball just to try to stay in the game and have a chance to win. But just getting into that level of play was fun being from here. Everybody that's playing Division I was their best player at their high school, so you're going out there and you're matching up with some guys that can play basketball.
You mentioned Leonard Allen and Michael Cage, and back in the day, Phil had alluded to that. They were San Diego State under Smokey Gaines. They had great teams. You mentioned some of the guys you played with, and we'll get to 14 Garrett a little bit later. I gotta ask you about him. But he was something else, man. He was a funny guy. But Mike, you grew up around UNM basketball. You talked about it. I was too young to see Bob King, but I saw Norm. And you grew up around that. You grew up around Coach Ellenberger and seeing the way his style was. He's a fast break. Coach Wisnett, John Wisnett, in charge of the defense. They put pressure on you, scoring in the hundreds, 102-98 against Las Vegas in the Convention Center. I still remember that as a classic game back in the day. So when Coach Colson comes in, you play for the late Gary Colson, rest in peace. We did a memorial show on him, and Coach Bob Lamphere was on it. He's a friend of the show. He knows you very, very well. Describe his style. You just mentioned holding the ball. You imagine Phil Smith, a New York point guard, having to hold the ball, and he had to do that. That's what you had to do to win. Talk a little bit about Coach Colson and his style, his coaching style, which was 180 degrees different from Norm Ellenberger. You didn't play for Norm, but you grew up watching him.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Phil hit on it a little bit. We were running a lot of set plays back then. I mean, that was just how things ran there. It wasn't with Coach Colson. It was more about some of the X's and O's, and I always tell people, Ed, you know this, and I think Phil touched on it as well. We didn't have this. The thing I love about this year's Lobo team is how deep they are. I think we'd have 6, 7, sometimes you might have 8 back in our day of guys that could really go. So if we got into foul trouble in some of those, if you had a guy get injured, all of a sudden you're down to where you just couldn't compete with the UTEPs, the Wyomings of the world with their group, and San Diego State because we didn't have the depth. So Coach Colson would do a lot of things just to try to address that. And I always tell people, that year after I left, they get ranked in the top 20, and they started doing some different things. He had Luke and Big Rob in there, and Rob Robbins and Charlie Thomas, and they started picking up the pace. Jimmy Rogers and Daryl McGee running a lot, quicker at the point. But they were just getting to the point with depth of players to where you could do some of the up tempo things. It was unfortunate, but we had to adjust sometimes. I mean, one year we ran. I'd sit with Coach Chiat and go through the tapes of who we were playing. We always played Thursday, Saturdays back in the day for the WAC. And I'd memorize their plays so that we'd come down, and behind my back, I'd throw a one if it was a man play, or a fist and we'd get into a zone if they were running man, and we'd get into man if they were running zone plays. And for about 6 or 7 games in the WAC, teams couldn't figure out what the heck was going on. And I think Brandenburg finally figured out, he was watching what we were doing. But I think for Colson, he was trying to be creative and just do what he could do with the talent and the depth that we had at the time. Gary was great about, trying to mold what he had into a productive and winning program. And, our senior year, we go 25-9 again. I'll be bittersweet about BYU, but back in the day, you learned about, it's big business for that tournament, because they took BYU over us that year because they were playing in Logan, Utah, the first round. So, looking back, those are kind of the things I missed that we didn't get the opportunity to do, is play in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, you're right there too.
I know if there's any kind of generational Lobo fan, they hear BYU and it's just I thought Jimmer, I thought Jimmer was phenomenal, but I was more of a Kawhi Leonard guy. In 86-87, UNM went 25-10, 11-5 in the WAC. And we've been talking about it, just came up short of an NCAA bid, losing to Wyoming in the WAC tournament. In the pit, talk about that season.
Yeah, that, man, it was a year we kind of started out a little bit slow, and then we hit our stride right around when the conference came along. Ed knows this. Back in the day, and I think it still holds true with the Mountain West now, you had to defend home court. If you could defend home court in the conference and then split on the road, you had a good chance at winning the regular season. I think that year we were the first year where they held the tournament at not that champion site, because I was at UTEP my first 2 years and Wyoming my junior year for the WAC tournament. So we had it on our home territory, man. We were going to get this. It's interesting. I think we had Wyoming towards the end, was one of our last regular season conference games in the pit. I get the ball to Hunter in the corner, and he hits a three with like no time left on the clock to upset Wyoming and beat Dembo and Lechner. And then the next week we have the tournament. I think it was right there in the pit. So we opened up with Colorado State. They were doing some interesting things. McAndrews back then was moving around. They were doing triangle and 2, box and 1 with Kelvin Scarborough, really trying to, kind of shake us up. We got past that game, and we have BYU again in the semifinal. And that was a knockdown drag out. I mean, we played really hard and came away with the win. So then we're in the final against Wyoming again. And the pit was rocking. It was, 10 points, Ed, that night. It probably was worth 12, but unfortunately we come up short towards the end. I mean, we were hanging in there pretty much, had a great first half against them. And, Finis Dembo, Eric Lechner, Sean Dent, a couple of the players they had. I think the first two went on to the NBA and had a pretty good career in the NBA. But you look back on that day and, man, why didn't I hit that three in the second half? Those kind of thoughts where if you could have done one or two things differently in the game, you probably had a chance to win it. But we had a great year at the time. I think we set the record for all-time wins for UNM. So for that group, Kelvin and myself were seniors with Kelly Graves that year. And, Hunter was a junior because he had been injured his sophomore year. So Hunter, we kind of left behind. He was the original group of freshmen back in '83. But, we knew they were loaded. That people don't realize we had Charlie Thomas, Rob Robbins, Marvin McBurrows, Daryl McGee, Jimmy Rogers. I mean, our practice team that we were going against was as strong as most of the teams in the conference that we were playing. So they made us a lot better. Rob Newton was out there too, Ed. So they're, the team that came in the next year, I wasn't surprised at all they got ranked in the top 20, because there were some players coming in and we felt like, hey, we're here. That was kind of walking away at that point in time. It felt like UNM was back.
Just on Ryan, your question is next, but I'm going to just, weigh in on that, Mike. That WAC championship loss to Wyoming, the next day, journal writer at that time, the late Frank Maestas, took Coach Colson to task for some late game strategies. There's some back and forth with he and Coach Colson. And Coach Cole, the game was lost, and shortly after, I think it was John Bridgers that fired Gary Colson. But think about things if UNM had won that game, if the Lobos had won that game, they go on to the tournament. Coach Colson probably stays. Supposedly, Brian Williams was signed here, and Matt Othick was coming too. And so it's a game of inches, Mike. It is. Yeah. Sean Dent, I believe, was fouled at the end of the game and made two, and this some late foul strategy that didn't work. And journal writer Frank Miasis wrote about it. And I'm not saying that got Coach Colson fired, but I'll tell you, I still remember the back and forth in the paper. And it was just a game of inches, and a game New Mexico probably should have won, and they didn't. And then that's when Coach Bliss came in. But there was a backstory to that. I just wanted to remind. I know you remember that.
Yeah. I think wasn't it John Koenig or Dr. Koenig? I think was the AD. He'd come in and taken over for Bridgers, and then he was the AD that got in trouble for falsifying the vouchers. So here's a guy firing a pretty decent coach and a good guy, and then he ends up getting caught doing some things. So but you hit on that. There was 88, 89, or 87, 88 is when Coach Colson had Matt Othick. He signed letter of intent. He had Brian Williams signed letter of intent. Brian ended up going to Maryland, I think, for the first few years, and Matt had a great career at Arizona. But that we were starting to get a pretty good pipeline with some really top-notch players. So a setback there. I think sometimes, Ed, the university, I felt bad about Coach Gonzalez because, a local guy, and I just kept going, man, just give it this last year of the contract. Just let's see if we can get there because, when Rocky got let go, and then you see, Coach Colson kind of going out when he just got the program to where we're probably going to be in a pretty good spot for 5 or 6 more years. I talk about Roy's sister, Yvonne Sanchez, as well. She gets let go that year, and I think she had just one of her better recruiting classes coming in. So a lot of times you've said it before on the show, the only game in town, there's a little bit of additional pressure. And I think things that come with that where we make some decisions, but maybe in hindsight, you wanted to wait a little bit longer and see if things played out differently, but that's life. And that's, it's big business. So those things go on too. There's some revenue involved and they got to make those choices.
Especially here, Mike, Lobo basketball is king and will always be king, has always been king. That's the way it is. I'm sorry, Ryan, go ahead.
No, you're good. I was there for the Rocky resignation.
Yeah.
You played with some of the greatest Lobos in school history. Johnny Brown, Hunter Green, Kelvin Scarborough, Phil Smith. You've mentioned all these guys, but talk about having them as teammates.
Just, fantastic time. I mean, as a freshman, with a Tim Garrett, who I sat in the stands, and we were calling Tim "Don't Share It" Garrett the year before when I was at El Dorado as a senior, because Garrett wouldn't pass. I mean, Tim was he was going to shoot it. So to play with him, Nelson France, who was a great player out of Clovis High School, and a Johnny Brown, who was just, I remember Johnny was in my dorm room. I hadn't been moved into the dorms yet as a freshman, and Coach Colson asked, or Coach Scheid, if they could, hey, we got this recruit coming in, can we put him in your dorm room? I'm like, sure. So I go down that day and I opened the door, and Johnny's on my bed, and I was like, this is a man in here. I mean, he was just chiseled, cut, and like strong as an ox. And I was like, what is
he
going
sure
on?
Was.
Johnny didn't lift weights either. They were like, I'll never forget. And, Kevin Stark was our strength and conditioning coach. He's like, well, Johnny, how much can you bench? He goes, I don't know. I've never lifted weights. So they put on 225, and he does that like it's nothing. 280, nothing. 320, he just kept going up, and
wow,
he was just naturally strong. But the guys, I mean, again, my freshman group, I think, with Scar and Hunter and Larry Markland, to go through those things together. Some of the funny stories, we would travel a lot of times, and UTEP was our travel partner back in the day. So we'd be on airplanes with UTEP going up to Utah. So you got a chance to sit there with Jeep Jackson and Fred Reynolds and, a lot of the guys, Juden Smith, Dave Feidel, Ken Lockhart that played at UTEP. And you make, there's lifelong connections with some of your competition. So I think that's unique and fun as well in a conference that's not, too large. I mean, back in the day with our group, it was just fun to be around and get to be friends with the competition as well as your teammates.
You know, Mike, it's funny when you mentioned Kent Lockhart of Utah or UTEP, the minor PA announcer would always minor ball, and I remember Kent Lockhart's nickname was War Machine, and so he kept doing that. The PA announcer one time, minor ball. Colson got so mad, got his jacket and threw it. I don't know if you remember that. Threw it in the stands. He got so upset.
Oh yeah, yeah. That was also, Kelvin, you mentioned on this session with Phil, probably the fastest human being from baseline to baseline that I ever played with. I mean, people be like, well, hey, why don't you shoot more? I'm like, well, most of the time I was inbounding the ball. So I'd inbound to Kelvin. He'd be down the court. I'd get to half court, and he was already going into dunk. So I was like, my senior year, I finally convinced Colson. I said, hey, can we put in, on our early offense, can you put in a play where I can come down to the top of the key, and maybe if they don't have anything, get a shot up? And he was like, oh, yeah, let's do that. That's a good idea. So some of the funny things with Scar, though, he hit his head at UTEP. I think it was our sophomore year. He had a dunk where he had a breakaway dunk. Gets the slam. Haskins calls timeout. We're in the huddle, and Kelvin's over there going, man, Mike Winters, my head. I hit my head on the glass. And I'm like, whatever. There's no way you hit your head. And we're talking in the timeout. Sure enough, the next day we're watching the film, and that dude hit his head on the glass of the backboard.
Oh, man. At
6 foot tall. I mean, he could flat out. They called him the human satellite for a reason. He could just flat out fly. But, Hunter and I are still close. I text him. If it's sometimes during the game when I get frustrated, I'll shoot a note to him, and he'll answer me after the game. And I know George does that as well. George Scott and I are still in contact. So the friendships and, you put that time in the court and the classroom with those guys, and you have friends for life.
Finally, Mike, the current Lobos are 18-4 and 6-3 in Mountain West Conference play. I know you're still a big fan. After the loss to Boise State, what does this team need to do to secure that NCAA bid? There's Mike, you're well aware, New Mexico at the pit and on the road is a different thing. Even in the Cooper and Johnson years, Marvin Johnson years and Ellenberger years, they struggled at Utah and BYU on that road swing. New Mexico has some divots in the road, but it played very, very well so far this season. What do they need to do to secure that NCAA bid? Looks pretty right now, but there's some pockmarks in the road coming up.
Yeah, it's a tough part of the schedule coming up, and I think you look at it, they've got to definitely defend home court and get all those wins. I was thinking before they could probably split with the Big Four on the road. We've got Nevada coming up. I'm telling you, Ed, those guys that left the pit for those teams though had circled the date on that calendar. Be it Utah State, be it Nevada, be it San Diego State. That UNM game is, that they got embarrassed, and they're not going to let that go easy. So I think it's only kind of going to be magnified to go into those arenas and try to get a win. I thought Boise did an incredible job of kind of just playing team basketball and getting us a little bit out of kilter to where, Mash forced a few shots that he hadn't been doing. And, House missed quite a few. They were close to going in, but just couldn't get it going. And Dent, I really like to watch Dent. He's amazing, but as he took on that scoring role, you kind of lose Toppin and the other guys. To me, I wish we'd have got that, because it's going to be hard to go get 2 or 3 of those next Big Five on the road taken care of. Wyoming's not easy to play. I'll tell you what, you go up there, it's brutal. It's cold. It's like you're in some kind of foreign land. It's just a different world up there. And you get in, the Cowboys are there. They're throwing M&Ms at you, quarters. I'll never forget my freshman year. I think it was Niles Dockery. He had about $2 in quarters in his sock because they were throwing it on our bench the whole game. So it's not easy to get out on the road and get a win. But I think we're going to have to get 3, probably 2 or 3 on the road and take care of home court, and then still perform pretty well in the tournament. So the net ranking, it's real high, so that's a plus. The conference is getting great publicity, and that always helps. Ryan, back east, man, it's tough to get noticed from the West. So I think these TV games are fantastic, but I'd like to see them get back on track. It seems like they got a little a little out of their rail where they had been against Boise State, and you just hope they regroup and get back to what they were doing there for those 4 or 5 games.
Been an exciting season. One more question, Mike. After you played for the Lobos, you've lived here in town. Your son Mark and your daughter-in-law Jazz. You have your grandfather. What else is going on with Mike Winters? What did you do after basketball? What are you doing here in Albuquerque?
Well, a big, Ryan asked earlier, why'd you go? A big driving force is, I think, for most guys, is you're probably going to end up living where you go and play basketball or where you go play football. A lot of guys come in from out of state, end up staying here. A lot of my teammates are here, so I wanted to stay here. So that was another reason to stay and go to UNM. I was fortunate, I was out at back then we had 5 to play 4. I played 4 straight, and that year, 87, 88, when Colson had that really good year, they got ranked in the top 20. I was sitting on the sidelines watching the game, and I was getting ready to go. I applied to Arizona State in North Texas for my master's degree as well as UNM, and Coach Bliss gets the job after they let go of Coach Colson, and Coach Bliss had recruited me when he was at SMU, and he picked up the phone, asked me to come down to the offices, and we sat there for a while. My dad went with me. He wanted to meet my dad, and he offered me the graduate assistant job. So, as fate would have it, I get to stay here and have 2 more years at the Anderson School working on my master's degree in business, and got exposed to college coaching. I was running the underclassmen. Back then, we'd go all the way to 6th grade. I remember sending notes to Jason Kidd, and you'd make copies of everything back in the day and just mail it out to all these recruits. But Coach Bliss was great for me, just getting to see the side of coaching and the dedication and the hard work that it takes to be successful at this level. And after those 2 years, I sat down with him, and I ended up just not sure I wanted to be a coach. And he said, "Hey, get out there in the world and see what's going on." He had gone and worked for P&G for a few years. So I took a job with M&M Mars. I was with M&M Mars for 4 years in sales. And then the last 30 years, I recently retired. But the last 30 years, I worked for Coca-Cola North America. And big portion of that, I had Sonic Drive-In as my customer. So I did a lot of work in the West. I had over 1,400 drive-ins where I was responsible, and I had the headquarter call point the last 3 years. So I had a really successful business career, and now I just bounce around and play golf and pickleball and a lot of things around town.
That's awesome, Mike. That's awesome.
I was going to ask you, because you had mentioned Jalen House earlier, and I didn't mean to switch going from what you did post to the current state of UNM basketball, but you said he was an exciting player. Now the name is escaping me of who you said he reminded you of. I think you said Tim Hardaway.
Gary Payton.
Gary Payton. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I think the glove. They called Gary the glove.
Right.
Defensively. I'm laughing, Ed. I'm at the game, and Ryan, I'm at the San Diego State game, and I was like, I don't know what Trammell's going to do the rest of the afternoon, because he's not going to know how to act without House being on his right hip. I mean, Jalen rode Trammell that whole game, and people don't realize the energy and just the skill and ability to take the guy full court and stay right there. Just to stay right there with that other player it's amazing to watch. And George Scott and George is great. George says, if Mash is hitting and Jalen is just being Jalen, we're okay. And that was kind of, at halftime of that game, I saw George up on the concourse, and that's what he says. So hey, Jalen's being Jalen, Mash is starting to hit, we're going to be okay. And sure enough, that second half, they just got on a roll. But yeah, I just to see the passion and energy, and sometimes, everybody's going to kind of criticize a little here or there, but I tell you, he backs it up, and guys like that, a Scott Skiles, a Gary Payton, a Tim Hardaway, they talk and they're some would say showboating at times, but if you can back it up and do that at that level, more power to you. I mean, I'm just impressed to watch him, and I love to see him when he gets on a shooting streak, because you can just see, he just kind of grows a couple inches when he's hitting shots.
It's funny. I don't know why I forgot Gary Payton, because I thought the glove immediately. And my friend from high school, His name's Rick Thompson. He joins us on. He played basketball for Damian
Oh, yeah.
Segura at St. Pius. I always like to mention that he was a two-time All-State offensive lineman because he's not. I'm not a big guy. My mom thought she was giving birth to an offensive lineman. I tell that story a lot, and I'm 5'8", and like now I gained weight. I'm 160, 170 pounds soaking wet now because I stopped drinking and all I do is eat and sit on my butt. But when you mentioned the glove, I thought Rick calls him the pest, and he got that. And this is a pop culture reference. It was a really bad. If you're familiar with the actor or comedian John Leguizamo, he was in a movie in the late 90s called The Pest. And it's like a really bad B movie, and Rick always refers to him as the pest. So you've got the glove and the pest, and that's where I was just going with that comparison. I'm sorry I lost you with that obscure pop culture reference. Yeah. But I thought that was funny, so we'll definitely have to incorporate that. But yeah, you had mentioned, and I don't want to keep any longer, but yeah, you had mentioned the road that they have to go on, and I had the darn schedule on as a picture on my phone that starts in the next week, and it is they go to Arena Auditorium, which I had always heard. I remember Daniel Ferris tell me, and Ramon Martinez are like, it's not easy to win up there. It's at Wyoming. You don't know what UNLV team you're going to get. That's the following Saturday. Then and then you get. I had Coach Steve Alford on the show last year, and I don't know. I referred to the Mountain West Conference as the Gauntlet of Death, and I haven't referred to it as this year because I'm sure the Big 12 is like the Gauntlet of Death, but they get their Gauntlet of Death, and it's at Nevada, at San Diego State. Then they get Colorado State at home. So that schedule does no favors. But I think my last question to you is, and I've appreciated your time, is how do you bounce back from a loss like that to a very good? It's not like they didn't lose to like a group of schmucks. Boise State is good, but how do you bounce back after a loss like that?
Yeah, I mean they'll have to come out, I think, quick in this game that's coming up. I think they're on Tuesday is when they're playing up there.
Yeah, it's Tuesday, and it's 6:30. It's not 8:30 or 9.
Crazy. They're probably going to have snow all over the place up there. But yeah, I think they just come out quick. We started out great against Boise, and then it seemed there was a couple of tweaks. I thought Coach Alford did a good job throwing a 1-3-1 against us. I think we're going to see more of that. Boise State threw a 1-3-1 against us in the second half. We had 3 straight turnovers. So I think there are going to be some tweaks as we go into this part of the conference play where some of these teams are seeing certain things work to slow down a House or a Dent or a Mashburn. And, I thought Nevada did a great job on top. And I really think that Coach Alford or Coach Neal were thinking, hey, if we can kind of slow down Toppin on the inside, we're going to have a shot at this game. And the team shot so well against them that they didn't have a chance. But to answer the question, Ryan, I think we got to come out fast. You got to have a short memory. I mean, this game's behind you. You're not going to make up. Rice comes out of his shooting slump. I mean, I had watched Boise several times, and I mean, Rice was having trouble hitting the backboard when I saw some games, and then he gets into the pit, and all of a sudden he couldn't miss. So, I think it's just stepping up and coming out those first 5. Coaches will say they'll play those 4-minute segments, but the first probably 12 minutes is going to be key. Wyoming's a tough place to play. You can see what they've done up there. They beat Nevada. They had Colorado State. I think it was the biggest comeback in NCAA history. It was 1 minute and 5 to go, and they beat Colorado State in overtime. So you got to be prepared, and again, you got to step up, and I think just come out all guns blasting. Don't hold anything back because it's the time of year when we got to get some wins.
Real quick, Mike, it's bound to happen when you're winning 5 in a row. There's going to be adversity. Yeah, you mentioned teams have you circled. You're ranked 19th in the country. You can only imagine what Coach Rice said before the game in coach speak. He's probably, hey, if you turn the ball over, showing clips of people dunking, blocking, this is what's going to happen. So take care of the ball in whatever coach speak he says. Otherwise, you're going to be getting blitzed here. They've won 5 games in a row by 20 points. So you better do this, this, and this, and they did. And so you have to remember, New Mexico is a target. You said that. Going to Nevada, a target. Going to Utah State, a target. Going to San Diego State. You got embarrassed, man. Mike, you played. I played. You have a memory of that. You don't want to. So the next games, New Mexico is going to have to rise to that road challenge, and I think they can. But you're right. They have to have a short memory.
Yep. And I hope the bench. One thing we didn't talk too much about, but I think this year's team. I watch the bench a lot because as a player and my years coaching, if you got guys that could be out there playing a lot more minutes than they're playing right now, and I think our bench is fantastic. The support they show, and they're getting up and cheering for each other. That's a good thing to see because it's easy to kind of sit there and worry about your lack of playing time.
Yeah.
I think they've done a great job in supporting their team, and I think making them better in practice. So hopefully that continues and we get some good wins.
Ed, do you have anything else?
Mike, hey, man, it's good to see you. Thanks a
Good to
lot.
see you guys.
You've been really good and candid, and we look forward to having you back on.
Absolutely. Thanks. You guys are doing a great job.
We appreciate it. Mike Winters, he played. I almost called you Mark. That's why I kept on thinking your son, and then I put two and two together.
Right.
No, Mike Winters, he played for the UNM men's basketball team under Gary Carlson from 1983 to 1987. Hey, we appreciate your time. That was a great interview.
Hey, thank you.